Hello, all. Welcome. This is our second iteration of how to apply for CUSP Drought Funding 2025. And we sadly had a live webinar on the 4th that the recording was lost. So we're doing this again. And it's just me this time, so we won't be able to see those live questions in the chat, but I'll try to mimic some of the ones that came through during that session and address those through this sort of live walkthrough of our grant interface system. But I will start the slideshow first so that folks can see what I'm talking about and make sure that they are in the right place. And I'm going to share. There we go. I believe I've got it queued up. Let's see. All right. So, that is the introduction that I should have, but that is not my slideshow. I will get you there shortly. Let's try that again. The Farmer Emergency Fund was renamed, and so that is helpful for folks to know if they are searching just through Google and that sort of thing. It is now called the California Farmer Relief Fund. And there are additional opportunities that will be posted on that landing page, which I will put in the chat. But the point of introducing you to this is just so that you can recognize this little logo, which you'll see now. And this does house most of our climate-related programs for funding farmers. But it also includes other things on occasion, like organic transition programs and other things like that. So if you don't already have an understanding of that page, I'm going to put it right now in the chat, and folks could hopefully see that when we give the transcript. But the website is just caf.org/relief. So from that page, you would be able to get to the CUSP Drought landing page, which has all the specific information for the grant opportunity that we are talking about right now. So without further ado, I want to, just share with y'all, my name is Amber. I am a former CAF staffer. I now am contracting to support this effort. I live in Northern Oregon. I am both a small livestock operator. I have a targeted grazing operation up here, helping folks prepare their landscapes for different natural resource management concerns. And I feel ya. I know what it is like to be impacted by those things, but I am here to support you through the process, and just want you to know that that's why we're here. So reach out to me at any time. All right. We do work with additional TA providers that can help provide language support, for example, in some of our Asian business communities. ABERC is one of the folks that we would refer people to because our application is only in English and Spanish. So that's important to know, that we can connect you with the proper assistance depending on your language needs. All right, so I sort of already did this, sorry, but the welcome and intros, housekeeping is kind of irrelevant here just because it's just me, but I will try to obviously, manage myself in the same way that I would request live attendees to do. And yeah, just want to give a shout out also to all the TA providers that we coordinate with. It's really not possible without those folks. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the stats behind how frequent TA is used. And then we'll just jump right into the landing page. We'll do a live walkthrough of creating an account and all of that. And then also the specific questions in the application and how to answer some of these tricky scenarios. So we'll also cover eligibility and some of the follow-up and questions that come in the grant review process and the timeline. And normally I would do a Q&A, but there won't be a live one for that, but I will try to share some of the Q&A from the previous webinar. All right, so yeah, farmers want support, big shocker. 1 in 3, that we surveyed said they utilized a TA provider or a professional grant writer or contractor, potentially like myself, to help them access funding. And although a lot of the organizations like CAF are, paid through these grant processes to provide that technical assistance to farmers free of charge, sometimes they don't know that, or they can't find that person. And so they end up, hiring a private support person. But it's important to know that generally speaking, with most of these types of state level funding opportunities like CUSP, which is the California Underserved Small Producer Program, there is free TA assistance available. And that's kind of the whole point, is to make it easily accessible, especially for folks who identify as socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. So just let you know that we're here. And this is basically what it looks like when you register on the grant interface page. You'll see the CAF logo at the top. You'll see create a new account. And if you already have an account, but you can't remember your login info, you can just do the forget password for the email address that you used previously. It's also important to note that the form does have guidance in Spanish, but you have to scroll down using the slider bar on the right-hand side. So we will get into that in just a second here. What I want to do now is switch the screen that I'm sharing so that y'all can see. I'm going to stop this one real quick and we're going to jump around a little bit. So thanks for your patience. What I want to show you is the CUSP Drought landing page, which is an important one. And I have a lot of screens open. Forgive me. All right. There we go. Okay. So this is the same link that you can get to through the relief page. But this is all about the eligibility. So it's important to review this page prior to going to the grant interface, and I'll explain why. It's a little bit complicated how eligibility works, so I want everybody to be aware, but I'm going to put this in the chat as well. So again, this is just caf.org/CUSP-drought/. So all right, you can preview all the questions in the application as a PDF if you click on one of these English or Spanish buttons here. And if you're not already familiar, all of the CAF pages can be translated into Spanish if you go to this upper right and you toggle between Spanish and English. Because this is not like a super specific translation, just be aware that it is like a service, a web service. So sometimes the translations may not be perfect. All right, so let's talk about the timeline first. This application window has already opened on September 1st, and it goes through October 15th, and it will close at midnight. So make sure that you get your submissions in before that deadline. If you do start an application, you will get automated notices at 2 weeks, 1 week, and 48 hours to submit. So even if you've got a draft going, that's a good start, and you'll get those reminders. So you must be farming in California. I can't stress that enough. You can technically live outside of California and have a farm business in California. Sometimes that happens to folks in the northern region, in Nevada and that sort of thing. So that's fine. As long as your farming address is inside California, you would be eligible. You do have to be grossing less than $400,000, and we usually ask that is a 3-year average. For beginning farmers and ranchers who maybe don't have that many tax years available to them, it's just your gross average. And that's everything, before expenses and your other taxes and that sort of thing. So it's not your net income, it's your gross income. you are eligible to receive up to $20,000 in CUSP funding each 12-month period. And that 365-day limitation starts on the day that the California Department of Food and Agriculture, who hosts this program, verifies you in their system. So what that means is if CAF selects you for an award, we send that list to CDFA for a verification. Sometimes that takes about a week, 2 weeks, depending on the time of year. And from the date of their verification is when the clock starts. So for folks who applied to the September fall round of drought last year with CAF, the majority of them were verified on November 5th of last year. So this is a little bit of a tricky situation where we are encouraging folks to apply if they have previously unawarded impacts and they want to seek additional funding. But if the CDFA verification process this year, for some reason, happens to happen before November 5th, then technically they would not have met the 365-day eligibility component. So that's not likely because although the application closes on October 15th, it usually takes our review committee at least 2 weeks to process evaluations and make a recommended list to CDFA. And then it takes them another week or two usually as well. So I suspect if our review committee submits October 31st, then the CDFA folks will not process within 3 business days. That's highly unlikely. So if you find yourself in this situation, please go ahead and apply. Some folks are running into some issues with the eligibility quiz if this is their scenario. So reach out to me directly, farmerfund@caf.org, and I can help you with the eligibility quiz if this scenario applies to you. All right, but it's important to note that CUSP Drought and CUSP Extreme Weather are 2 separate programs under CDFA, and each farmer is eligible for $20,000 under both programs per year. So that's a total of $40,000. So your impacts might be much greater than that, but technically if you can, show your documentation sufficiently, you could get awarded from both of those programs. And extreme weather does not cover drought. That's why we have them separated in the system. So things like acute heat waves seem like they are related to drought, but because they're on a shorter timeline, they are put into the extreme weather bucket of funding and opportunities as opposed to drought. So just something to keep aware with. CAF has already run their extreme weather program funding opportunity for this year, but there will be another one next year. And I believe there's 1.3 million available in that fund. Right now with CUSP Drought, there's about 1.6 million available. So please apply because we have a lot of money to get to farmers that qualify. All right. A lot of this is covered in detail under this frequently asked questions button. So you can just check that out. It's a PDF and it opens in a new tab. Here's the timeline and general information again. So these are what we call allowable practices inside the program. These are things like increased utility bills for water and electric, surface water costs if your irrigation district is now charging you more, the cost of hauling water for both livestock and crops. And last year, the only thing that was not on this list was the use of these funds for upgrading to a larger pump that draws more water. So that is a huge change from last year, and it's worth noting. There is a restriction on the size of those pumps that will be compensated, and that is the 40 horsepower. That's the maximum that they will reimburse for. And on that note, reimbursement is key here. You might have invoices that are unpaid. Those will not be approved through the review process, unfortunately. And we know that that's a challenge for farmers who don't have access to the capital. But if you can take a loan out temporarily to pay those things and then submit those receipts of payment, those will be covered. So this is true for some farmers that I've helped in the past, and they weren't aware that it's a reimbursement grant. So just make sure that you understand that's the main way that folks will get compensated, is through costs that they have already incurred. With that being said, I want to introduce a sheet a little bit later on when we're inside the application that shows you a way to account for things like income loss, if your harvest is reduced from drought, or market disruptions, and those types of things that are considered reimbursable, even though they're not technically something that you can prove with a receipt. All right. So without further ado, I sort of already talked a bit about our review process, but once the application's closed, there is an evaluation committee that will look at those. They are trained and calibrated to, come through that evaluation process much the same, to remove a lot of bias in the system. It is both quantitative and qualitative, so I will stress this again when we look at the application, but your narrative components can really affect your score, because if you don't give a good explanation of what documentation you're including and why, it'll be really difficult for reviewers to, for example, look at a 40-page P&L Schedule F and find out, what kinds of costs you're trying to articulate that you've endured. So, all right. Supporting documentation is critical to the success of getting funded. All right. There's lots of different ways that you can show your impacts. As we just mentioned, there's a profit and loss Schedule F statement. That's quite common for folks to show a reduced income over different growing years. Harvest and sales records. If you lost market access due to, having to drive too far and hauling your excess water or fallowing fields or anything like that, then you could maybe show some of that from the year prior. If you had a notice from a groundwater sustainable agency, a management agency, then you may be able to show your demonstration, in decreased supply or increased costs in that way. And we do link inside the application to the map so that you can figure out if you're in a groundwater management area and have to meet those types of criteria. So any receipts for infrastructure are great. So whether that's drip systems, pumps, all that kind of stuff, that qualifies. So please keep those, and you'll want to put all the receipts together and upload them as one big file. But it also includes things like increased fuel costs or increased, fertilizing costs or other types of soil amendments. So if you have a question about what qualifies under this application, please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, and then as I mentioned before, CAF is using an online grant management system called Founded, and you'll register, and I'll show you that in just a second. But what's important to know is that they actually have their own library of technical help and resources support, so you can also go there if for some reason I'm not available. My information is right here, farmerfund@caf.org, or you can call me at 831-291-3927. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that screen, and then we're going to go log in and check things out. All right, back to take a quick little water break and let all that juicy information soak in. It's cold up here in the PNW, so you can see I'm cozied up, my flannel jacket. All right, so we're gonna share this logon page. Here we go. So with my husband's permission, I'm using his email as my demonstration, and I'm just gonna log on. Actually, I apologize. I'm going to log out and show you something else actually about this page. Right here, it says Spanish below. So that's important to note that this description of the welcome to the portal and some information about how to log in is all right here in both English and Spanish, but just make sure to scroll that right side of the little window. Okay, so now we're gonna go back in and pretend to be my husband. All right. Let's try that. There we go. So if you pass the eligibility quiz, you should be looking at a page like this. And the eligibility quiz is just 5 questions like we already talked about, you know, do you make less than 400K? Are you farming in California? That sort of thing. But if you run into any issues and it tells you you're ineligible and you think that you should be eligible, it will actually give you a screen that has my contact information on it, and you can reach out to me directly and we can walk through that. But when you're on this screen, you'll see apply and opportunities. I think it's good to go to opportunities first, just so you can see if there are additional other opportunities. And you might see, for example, like this is an old one from the CUSP Extreme 2025. Here's a current one in Spanish for the organic transition pilot. So what you'll see if you pass the quiz is this little eligible box, and then it says some more details if you click on the see more. As we talked about, this is a link to the sustainable or the Groundwater Sustainability Agency map. And this is the executive order link if you need to determine whether or not that applies to you. And then again, just some general eligibility here. It might be worth noting that although we try to make sure that these are serving small farmers who are making under 400K, there's also a minimum requirement of 10K. We do allow a section in the form for folks to explain. For example, maybe it's their first year and so they don't have a ton of income because there's a lot of investments that go into your first year, and so it's sometimes hard to show a profit. So you will have a chance to articulate your scenario inside the application. But this just reviews what we already talked about. And there is an exemption as well for dairy and ranchers that they can make up to 1 million because the nature of those operations is a little bit different, and you're still considered a small rancher, even if you make 1 million in gross sales. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit apply in the upper left, and then you should see what I see, and my screen should change so that I can apply to that program. Not sure. Hang on. All right, here we go. Do apologize. I am on satellite Wi-Fi. Things are slow. So because they passed the eligibility quiz, this process is the terminology that the grant interface uses, just to tell you that this is the funding opportunity. So you're seeing CUSP Drought Funding 2025. There's the contact information. And then you're going to scroll down and get into the meat and potatoes of our application. This is new this year for this funding process because we did have some folks that were confused with the first question that used to be farm and ranch name. We know that lots of folks have a farm and ranch name that they're doing business under that name, but they have like maybe, for example, an LLC with a different name. So the legal business or entity name is important because if you're selected for an award, that legal business entity name needs to match whatever your payment information would be. And sometimes folks get confused and a check gets issued to them in a name that is not open for them to utilize. So please make sure that that field is completed correctly, everything's spelled correctly, etc., because that will make the process of getting awarded a lot faster if you're selected. And then your farm and ranch name is helpful for us in our system, just because if there are 10 farms with the same name, we need to be able to articulate between, and so this helps us distinguish. And then if you have any social media handles and that sort of thing that you want to share, a website or an Instagram account, we're happy to connect with you in that space too. And we have a lot of great content through our own social media channels, so definitely check out that and share if you like. Main source of income. It is important that we are supporting folks who are primarily farmers. What I want to say with regards to that is often if you're first starting out as a farmer, you have off-farm jobs and income because that's normal. It takes a lot to transition to this type of work full time. And so I would encourage you to answer yes to this question, even if you work off-site part-time. As long as you're involved in day-to-day operations of your agricultural operation or your family farm, and you're working the land and you're out there regularly, then you would want to answer yes to this question. And as I mentioned earlier, like that's true for me. I basically contract half-time and I run my other operation half-time. So I would still answer yes to this question. All right, farm address, as we noted, farm address can be different from your mailing address. Not everyone lives where they farm or ranch, so that's fine. But you'll want to articulate the difference here, because also when checks are made or other payments and communication, it's important for us to know the farm address, different from mailing address. And of course, the farm address has to be in California. All right. This next question is mostly an internal, reporting question that's valuable to us to know if you've worked with CAF in the past to go through a funding process. So whether that was drought from 2022 or 2024, we had a winter storms and flooding, we had a wildfire recovery process in 2022, and then of course we just hosted our CUSP extreme weather. If you're not sure if you applied through CAF, it can get confusing sometimes, if you worked maybe with a different technical provider. We all call these programs different things and run them at different times of the year. So you can always select not sure, but usually it's pretty clear, that your payment came from CAF. So if you can review that and let us know, that's very helpful to us. Also, this next question, have you received funding from an organization other than CAF? That's useful. Oh, I think my screen sharing is paused and you can't see anything. Hang on. Oh my goodness. Okay, we're gonna go back to the top and make sure. I think we had a pause, a little glitch, and I want to make sure. It says I'm sharing, but then it also says that it's paused. So let me just double check here. I'm gonna stop my share, and then I am going to try again. All right, thanks for your patience, y'all. Usually I have an assistant. Okay, here we are at the top of the application page. So you've heard me talk about these things. Now you can see them, hopefully. Here we are with legal business or entity name, farm ranch name, website, main source of income, farm address, previous awards from CAF, and here we are. Have you received funding from an organization other than CAF in the past 12 months? Now, this is helpful just so that we understand what are the other TA providers in the space and how are they assisting folks. And it also does help CDFA determine eligibility and verification across these different TA providers that are all hosting, CUSP funding opportunities. So it's not a required question, but if you don't mind, please try to answer this to the best of your ability. Then we cruise on to your farm's total gross revenue. And as we stated before, some folks get a little bit confused about what we're asking here. You want to take your last 3 years of farm, operation taxes, if you have 3 years, and add your gross totals and then get an average and report that here to the nearest $5,000. The reason that that's helpful is that you might have a year where you're over 400, but then maybe you have 2 years where you're under, right? And then therefore your average is under the 400 and you're eligible. So that's actually really important. And if you don't know what gross revenue is and you want a definition, you can click right here and it'll take you to another tab that helps explain that. We do collect information on how many acres you're farming. That's just helpful for us to understand the different scales that different types of operations are at in California. We do ask about what your farm produces, just so we can understand, are folks primarily one crop type or are they diverse operations? And just to see if there are trends in space about what types of, crops and operation products are trending. We do also ask some demographic information, which is important because, as I mentioned, the CDFA does require that at least 50% of these funds go to folks who are identifying and qualify as socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. And the CDFA has that definition on their site if you're curious, but please try to answer this to the best of your ability. But if you're not comfortable doing that, that's okay too. You can say other or prefer not to answer. We do ask about first generation immigrant farming. This is defined as you or your parents have immigrated to the United States and then became farmers. So that's helpful to us to understand what percentage of the population we're serving identify as immigrants, and thus what maybe their language or other technical support needs might be. We also have a question about your veteran status, if you're willing to answer that, and also if you identify as a woman or not, because women are also historically underrepresented in the farming space. This is helping us determine if we're able to shift who's being served equitably. All right. So that's kind of a lot, but we're going to jump into drought impact types. And this section of the app is arguably the most complicated, so it's important to pay attention. We want to know your estimated current financial impacts, and this number does not have to match what you're requesting. So for example, you might have had, $40,000 in damages, and maybe you haven't had a chance to pay for some of those damages. So you might report 40,000 here in this field, but you can only show receipts for 20,000. That's okay. We want to know, how much of your total impact do you think we can actually reimburse? So please put your total estimated financial impact there. And then also we'd like to know, in what ways are you being impacted, right? Is it that you had to fallow land, you had crop loss directly, you had market losses, water shortage, transportation cost increases, reduced access to surface water, lost wages for your crew? All those things would qualify as different types of drought impacts. So, and if we forgot something on this list, you can select other, and then you'll have a chance to type that in individually. This narrative section, as I mentioned earlier on, is super critical. We need to know what happened, when did it happen, and how that relates to the documentation that you're going to supply for us to evaluate. The more you articulate this section clearly, the better chances you have of getting awarded. Because as I mentioned, if you give a 40-page document to somebody with no frame of reference for where to look inside that document to determine what you're claiming, it can be very challenging to connect the dots. So you want to do that work for the evaluator as much as possible. And you have 10,000 characters available to you to do it. So there should be no issue with the amount of space to tell your story. All right, so hopefully I'm driving that point home clearly. Let's talk about this next section. This is not part of your evaluation, but it's really helpful to CAF to understand what types of drought adaptation efforts are folks doing. This might be related to some of the costs that you're asking for reimbursement, like if you're doing compost and mulch applications, or you've upgraded, to a micro sprinklers or drip system. That's all obviously stuff that could be reimbursed if you've got receipts for it. So it's related, but this is not a ranked question. It's just helpful for us to know what folks are doing. There's some really innovative systems out there that people are playing around with. This can also apply to things like software that's helping you with your water monitoring or water budget. So just let us know what you're up to on your farm, and what kind of things you're doing to adapt and improve your systems to deal with drought. All right. So this next section, as I mentioned, is sort of the accountability and a specific area where you want to articulate what types of impacts you have incurred. So if you wanted to select from the list the drilling of new wells or repairs, to be eligible, you do have to have a written verification from a groundwater sustainable agency that's managing that basin or the area where the well is located. So to find out if that's you, you've got to check out these two links. And so similarly, like I mentioned, last year, upgrading to a larger pump was not an eligible expense, but it is this year. So check any and all of these things that apply to you, but only check the ones that you have reimbursement information for. So it might be the case that you have you need to upgrade to a larger pump, but you haven't done it yet, right? So if you check that you upgraded to a larger pump to draw more water, but you can't provide a receipt, and you try to include that in your reimbursement costs, it won't match. So definitely make sure that these are just the things that you're asking for funding for. Whereas in the list above, you can say, I have been impacted in these ways, right? All right. After you select which reimbursable categories you're asking for, and as I mentioned prior in most of these questions, there is an other option if we didn't list something that's important for you. So you'll have a chance to type that in manually. The verification and losses section, this is where you want to make sure that you are matching your request with what is provided in the documentation that you supply. So if you supply documentation that shows you only have 5,000 in reimbursable expenses, but you select 10,000, it's not likely that you would get covered for 10,000 because you're only showing losses and reimbursement receipts, etc., for 5,000. So we did do something different this round, and we dropped the tier to 2,500 because some folks who are just starting out, might not have a very big operation, and so maybe their impacts aren't very great, but 2,500 is still a big deal to someone who only makes 10K a year. So please try to select the category that's closest to your budget outlined below, and we'll get there in just a second. As I mentioned, you'll have a chance to upload 3 different documents, and that doesn't mean just 3 files. It does mean that you can combine files together. And generally, we request folks to organize that in such a way that it matches their request. So if you're asking for coverage on a pump, and you want to show that you have the receipts and the labor costs and all that, maybe you have photos of the installation, all those go into one PDF and you submit it as your supporting documentation. There is a link and a video tutorial if you're not sure how to put documents together into one PDF. So go ahead and click that if you want that kind of guidance, or reach out to me and I can walk you through it as well. As I mentioned previously, there are types of allowable reimbursement that aren't hard receipts for infrastructure purchases and things like that. And that is this income loss calculation worksheet. This is an Excel sheet that we put together that helps you walk through some different scenarios that you might have in your system. So I'm going to pause, or I'm going to stop screen sharing on this right now, and I want to go to that worksheet so that everybody can see it. So let's open it up, if I can find it. Okay. Yeah. There we go. There we go. Okay, so now you should be seeing this Excel sheet. This Excel sheet is pretty simple. This is estimated yield loss tab. There is an income loss from planting tab, and also a income loss from market disruption tab. So you want to make sure that you're entering data into the correct tab. You can use all three of these, but make sure that they relate to the tab label. So estimated yield loss is pretty straightforward. And there's an example in here. We'll just walk through it together briefly. So let's say you are growing okra and you've got 2 acres at 80 rows. You planted it on May 15th, 2022, and your estimated yield value was $3,600. If you weren't able to plant those rows that you would normally, or when you harvested you had less than you would normally, right, then your estimated loss is this formula that's already in here. That's 90%, right, of your estimated loss. So that means that most of that $3,600 you normally would have gotten from that crop harvest is no longer available to you. So that $3,240 would go into your budget line item in the application as a yield loss estimate. If you had an income loss or a planting delay, the same example applies, right? Maybe you normally would plant in May, but you had to plant in June, and some of your plants didn't make it and you had to purchase some transplants, right? And so you have like all of that actual loss for the income that you thought you were going to have. So just walk through those, but be sure to remove the example when you're ready to download this file, because you don't want us to, see that you're using okra when you don't grow okra, right? So just make sure that you remove the example when you're ready to submit. All right. And then similarly, this is helpful if you had market closures and you have like records of sales from a prior farmer's market, for example, the year before, and you know that, hey, I usually make, 3,000 at this market, but I had, some market disruptions from the drought, so I didn't have any produce to sell, so I couldn't go to that market. Then you can make those comparisons and share those historical records with us so that we can verify that. Okay, so we're gonna pop back out of that calculation sheet and get back into the application. Let's see. All right. I think I can share again. Thanks for bearing with me as we keep going through all these little jumps and jumping around. All right, so this supporting documentation, there is something that's very similar to the income loss calculation worksheet that I just reviewed with you. It's called the CUSP Technical Assistance Checklist. You can click on this, but if you are not a trained CUSP provider, which means you have taken a training with CDFA, then you can't use this to submit supporting documentation. This can be helpful in the case where like you don't have photos and you don't have receipts, but maybe this provider knows your operation really well and can vouch for you and your situation. That is where the checklist is very helpful. Or if you're just not sure how to do the income loss calculation worksheet that we provide, you can ask for a TA provider to help do this with you, but it does require a physical field visit to your farm. So if you happen to be a farmer and a CUSP TA provider, you cannot use this checklist on your own farm. You would have to get a different technical assistance provider to do the worksheet with you and sign off on it. So apologies if you're in that situation, but yeah, it's just to help with bias in the system. And it's also really great if you can use this section to describe what the documentation is that you're submitting. So again, if this is for, emergency irrigation upgrades, like you can articulate, the dates, the times, the types of impacts or crops, etc. And then that helps with the reviewer when they're looking at your documentation to make sure that that narrative section matches. The more you use this and give detailed descriptions, the better off you will be. And then that repeats 2 more times for a total of 3 sections. You're only required to submit 1, but we encourage you to use all 3 of these if you are able. The more you have, the better and easier it is for an evaluator to determine your case. All right, so this is our last big section that's important. This potential budget outline is for you to articulate the different types of costs or impacts that you are seeking reimbursement for. So if you had income loss, you could put that on line item 1 and use the numbers from your calculation worksheet to put the amount in the second column, and so on and so forth. If you've got emergency irrigation upgrades and infrastructure, you can write that as your category and then combine all of those receipts and amounts into the second column. And it will auto calculate down here for you your totals. So as I mentioned before, if you end up with more than 20,000 in this column down here with the calculator, or in this field with the calculator, then you know that it's okay for you to submit, documentation for more than the 20K. But if you only end up with 5K in this calculator field, then you don't want to request more than 5K. All right, this is our last section. We're in the home stretch. Verify and confirm that the things that you have done in this app are true to the best of your knowledge. We do ask if you've got some assistance helping fill this out, whether that was a phone call with a TA provider, your family member, a grant writer, whoever it is. We like to know, how easy is it for folks to do this on their own, or do they really need the technical assistance? You are also welcome to put a reference here. This can be just a personal reference. It can be a reference to a TA provider that you have a relationship with. Or someone, who gives you language support, whatever you want, but it's not required. As I mentioned, you'll want to attest that everything is truthfully represented. If you are chosen to receive the grant, we would love to be able to use your farm name and your image or your story to help get the word out to other farmers. You do not have to answer yes to this question or to receive a fund. But it does help us also, advertise to other folks about these types of opportunities. And then if you're not already aware, it'd be great to get you connected to the mailing list so that you get notified about these opportunities as well as others. And just kind of into the CAF fold, there are a lot of other great programs and services besides grant funding that they offer, like pest management support, farm to market support, technology support, all kinds of great stuff, food safety programs, you name it. CAF has it all. Get hooked up. And then you do need to understand that if you are selected for an award, it is required by the federal government for CAF to be able to provide a W-9 as the record of our services, financial services to small farmers. So you will need to provide a social security number if you are a sole individual proprietor, or an ITIN if you do not have a social security number. And then if you're an LLC or some other type of like S Corp or something like that, usually you have an EIN or the employer identification number, and those will need to match your application. Because again, as we said, your legal business entity name is what your W-9 should also say. And that's who, has to sign it. So if you're like a partnership and only one of you has signature authority, that's who should do the application. All right. So those do get submitted to us, but through this system, and this is a secure system, so we prefer that you don't email that sort of thing. But if you are awarded, you will get a follow-up email, and it will ask you to fill out a W-9 and a payment document, and they'll be in English and Spanish, depending on which application you filled out. If you have questions about that or how we handle that data, please come to me and let me know. I'm happy to help articulate that as well. And then it does help us know just an estimate of how long it took you to get through the application. And that includes things like gathering your data to get prepared to apply, not just how much time you log while you're on the system. So you may have seen that there's, no save button like while you're going through all this. It does auto save every 30 seconds, but then if you scroll down at the bottom, there is a save application or a submit button. So if your computer crashes or the dog is barking, you have to get up and go away from your computer or something, don't worry. For the most part, everything that you've done thus far should be saved. I haven't had any issues with that so far. So I'm hoping that, that folks feel good about how the system takes care of their data and saves their progress. And I just want to check in with everybody, make sure you're feeling good, that you got answers to the questions, hopefully, that you had. And I think we've already kind of talked about the special cases and common issues, but I do want to get back into the presentation just briefly so that you can see, what to expect once you submit, right? So you will get a series of email updates as you progress. Oh, there we go. Sorry, we jumped the gun. So the 7-day due date reminder, I think I already mentioned that. There's a 48-hour reminder as well. You will get an approval or a declined message. The declined message is not automated, so it comes from me personally, and I have to tell you the sad news. But if you have questions about why you were denied, I'm happy to dig into your application and provide some feedback. So that you can understand for the next year, how to improve your application. There is a 14-day post-award reminder. So that's for those payment forms or W-9 forms, as I mentioned. And some folks are, this happens right before the holiday season, basically. So please make sure that you have the grant interface admin email approved and that it's not going to your spam folders, so that you know that you've been awarded and you can respond quickly so you can get paid quickly. All right. There it is. Thank you so much. As I said, I'm Amber. Call me, email me, reach out, get some help. We're here for you. Take care.